Welcome back to the PFF NFL show. I'm Trevor Sikkema. That is Ollie Connolly here to do a handful of things with you here on this In the Trenches episode of the program. First, we're going to recap Monday Night Football, get to talk about that game. Very close game throughout between the Miami Dolphins and the Los Angeles Rams. Pretty big win for the Dolphins, really, to get their morale right and to get the vibes up for Miami. And kind of a crushing loss for the Los Angeles Rams, who I think a lot of people believe was their Cinderella or darling team of the second half of the season. Makes it a little bit tougher of a road now, but we'll dig into all that. We're also going to get back into the trenches, of course, as the title of the show is. Going to get into the Buffalo Bills offensive line. They got a major matchup with the Kansas City Chiefs this week. Talk about some of the things that Buffalo's been doing along the offensive line. They've been really helping them get to that really good record this season. And then also going to talk about the Detroit Lions, right? This is a team that they're winning in a lot of different ways. We saw that this past weekend, a thrilling buzzer beater, walk-off home run type of a field goal against the Houston Texans. And this team's rolling. We know that they're one of the best in the NFL, but how have they coped with the loss of Aiden Hutchinson? Have they been doing enough at the deadline? We're going to talk about the Za'Darius Smith edition as well. Ollie, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. We got a lot of really great stuff to talk about. Obviously, Week 10, so second half of the season is in full swing. But let's recap Monday Night Football. The Miami Dolphins, they win this game 23-15, and sort of like I talked about in the intro, it feels like, man, Miami needed this one. It's been a down season for the Miami Dolphins, and obviously it's a team that was extremely potent, one of the most explosive offenses in the NFL last year. Tua gets hurt at the beginning of the season, and boy, through, I would say, the whole first half of this year, they have been one of the least explosive teams in the NFL. And Ollie, we know quarterback is very, very important. I don't even know if I knew that it was this important, especially what Tua was to this team, because holy cow, this looked like a lifeless offense. It looked like a lifeless team without Tua. Now he comes back after the concussion injury, and they go on the road and get a huge win in Los Angeles. The offense looks a little bit better. Overall thoughts on this game. Was it more you loved what you saw from Miami, or were you more disappointed in the Rams? So I said kind of still had playoff aspirations before this game.
Yeah, I think slightly more disappointed the Rams. A great victory, obviously, for the Dolphins on the road. Defense came to play finally, which I think was the big breakout story for them. Offense got just enough done and really kind of clustered what they did well to the opening drives of both halves. I think once you kind of got into the game, it wasn't quite as slick and proficient as we're used to seeing, right, where they can just kind of trigger and drive up and down the field. Particularly since Tua's come back, they've just been so crisp and relentless and rhythm-based for the most part, not always finishing drives, but you can see them just kind of melodically get down the field the way they do when they're rolling at their best. To me, it was more the Rams. You've got the 3 fumbles, 2 turnovers, can't convert on third downs, bunch of penalties, a ton of unblocked pressures despite getting guys healthy, right, and getting that group back into some sort of way that they wanted it to be. I thought really poor situational decisions from McVay just in terms of the general flow of the game when they're running the ball, when they tried to throw the ball. Bad tackling, just kind of go on down the line. When you get to a close loss like this and you're playing catch with the end, those are the things I think that jump out and stack up, just like all the little things, all the general bad football stuff went against the Rams.
Man, I was really impressed with Tua in this game. Ends up finishing 20 for 28, over 200 yards, 207 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. But, we were chatting a little bit before the show began, and I wanted to make sure to bring it up. We've talked about Tua as this sort of statue quarterback, right? I mean, he's just this guy who, it's a pocket passer. He basically does whatever McDaniels tells him. Like he can't think creatively. He can't think on his feet, out of structure. He's not a really great quarterback. It's tough to rely on him in those situations. I felt like he was pretty decent in those situations last night. And for as much as this is a guy who's suffered some really bad concussions before, I mean, look, you don't need to try to be making a tackle on an interception. We can try to put that to bed. Do the old Tom Brady where when you throw an interception, you just stand there and you just, put the head back. That's all we want from you at this point, too. I know he's trying to be a good teammate, but we need you out there, buddy. We really do. When the pressure was mounting on him, you saw him have to roll out. You saw him have to, make throws while taking hits. And I just wanted to give him his flowers in this game because this was a really good performance when things weren't going well for Tua, in my opinion. At least it was better than what we have seen in the past. And I thought that was a major reason because a couple of those throws were those big-time throws, not literally, I guess, categorized. I mean, just the phrase, they were bigger throws because they meant a lot more when he was getting pressured and he was completing them. The defensive line was doing their job on LA's side of things, but Tua was able to make up for it with those really good playmakers, especially right out of the gate in that first drive. We saw a lot of that too. So what did you see from Tua? Did you see the same thing? Were you as impressed when it came to the off-script stuff with him?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. The off schedule stuff with him has always been the concern. Is that how you can get after them, right? If you just flood it with zone coverage on the back end, get all the eyes on him, kind of keep a lid on the down the field stuff, is the line good enough to hold up? And last night they struggled. Turner got after him, Verse got after him, just one after one. The Rams came crashing home. They were pretty sound in coverage as well. A bunch of coverage sacks and coverage pressures, I would say, more so than just guys ripping off the edge and winning one-on-one battles. And you saw with Tua, it was his lowest percentage of throws beyond the sticks this season. It was so long as he's held onto the ball. And that's always been the thing with him. You go back to a really poor game a year ago against the Niners. That became kind of the en vogue thing, right? Can you just put so many bodies in the middle of the field as possible where he usually tortures people, get as many eyes on him, get some pressure, force him to move, and when he moves, he's just not as accurate. His decisions go haywire. And the Rams had that right game plan, and I think they were effective in part doing it. But as you said, there was probably 3 or 4 what would be game-clinching plays, if not big-time throws, as you said, in kind of the charted way of doing it. But the game-clinching, game-on-the-line type stuff was him moving and creating to his right, not just to his left, which is where it's always been a complete disaster when he has to move to his right normally. So that to me was like, that is a quarterback elevating the offense when things are just going wrong. Do you have to figure it out, Gene? Can you just get the ball to somewhere it needs to go? Can you get it in the hand of a playmaker who can go make someone miss? On some of those plays where he moved to create was when they forced a ton of the missed tackles that the Rams had. They just couldn't break down in space. So I thought that in terms of just figuring out, okay, the defensive game plan's really solid. They've got me. This is where I usually struggle. He did have the turnovers in one of those situations. Really, really poor pick, just kind of like flustered and bailing and panicking and throwing it into an area where he was picked off by a linebacker. But outside of that, for the most part, that was not where kind of the turnover-worthy plays and the really bad stuff happened. That was more within the structure of the offense. Things just don't look right, and I'm not sure where to go with the ball. When he did move and take off and try and do things on his own off script, he actually was pretty impressive, which is just not typically his game. So to get through one of those matchups on the road in a must-have game to try and stay in the playoffs, I thought it was pretty impressive stuff.
Yeah, I want to go to the defensive line and switch to the other side of things too, because we've talked about, all right, well, they haven't had Jalen Phillips for a little bit. Unfortunately, suffered another injury. They obviously have not had Bradley Chubb as well, so it's sort of been an up and down journey, I think, to say the least, for the Miami Dolphins. And as the offense has really struggled, the defense really has not been good enough to hold up their end of the bargain. I think their record, certainly before last night, showcased that. But along the defensive line specifically, you look at Chop Robinson, you look at Calais Campbell, you look at Zach Seifert, like those guys were playing well, and it yielded the highest pass rush grade in a single game as a team that they have had so far this season. 75.0 pass rushing grade for the Miami Dolphins defensive line. That's defensive tackles and edge rushers sort of lumped together. Highest single game grade that they have had. And when it comes to just overall defensive line grade, it was the second highest grade that they have had so far this season. So really good stuff from the Dolphins defensive line. And with this being a Trent show, you and I were chatting a little bit about Chop Robinson, who we weren't the biggest fans of when he was coming through the draft. I mean, I felt like he was more just a pass rush specialist kind of a guy. You talked about him as more of a potential stand-up linebacker, somebody who you could sort of use all over the line of scrimmage and sort of just try to use that explosiveness. But the Dolphins didn't draft him that way, right? The Dolphins drafted him in the first round, right in the early 20s. And when you do that, you're expecting this guy to be a 3-down defensive lineman for you. You are expecting him to be a premier, build around him type of an edge rusher, an impact player. And I was not sure if he was going to be that player in the NFL level. Obviously, they've got a lot of time to really answer that question. But certainly last night, he helped them out. Over 15% win percentage, got a sack. I believe it was 7 pressures in this game that he ended up recording for the team. And so really good game from Chop Robinson, and I think when they really needed him most. But what'd you see just from this Dolphins defensive line and then Chop specifically?
Yeah, Chop specifically, that's his best game as a pro, comfortably. And I was saying to you before, the thing with Chop Robinson's always been, we get the first step explosives. I get all the tools and the traits. What do they actually add up to in the end? Does he finish plays? Does he make impact plays? And I thought at Penn State, that happened mostly when he was inside as a mugged linebacker, when it was just pure get off the ball juice, make a clumsy guard or center miss, and you could just penetrate through to the backfield. There's nowhere really for the quarterback to escape. I didn't love the variety of moves. I didn't love the pass rush radar when he's kind of swooping around the edge, which is what his kind of first step quick style. That's how you would end up winning in the league. But last night, he put Noteboom in a blender a handful of times, one-on-one. The scheme was really good as well. Anthony Weaver deserves a bunch of credit. They've been blitzing at a really high rate all season, in part to cover up the lack of a pass rush. Last night, he just backs off the blitz completely. They show pressure a ton, but it's really just twisting and games and stunts and all that stuff up front. And Robinson was really good at kind of swooping around and crashing inside and being kind of part of the more cohesive pass rush plan rather than just you go and win one-on-one. So I thought that was by far his most impressive game. He did have the one-on-one reps you mentioned there. He got the sack. He got a bunch of pressures. Some of them unblocked, but that was, again, part of the more cohesive plan. That's his job, that's his role, and he executed it really well. So I thought it was a pretty impressive performance from the Dolphins in general up front. Certainly, Campbell, you mentioned Siler, was really, really good last night. And then Chop would be the one that stands out. Okay, is there more meat on the bones here? I always thought he'd be maybe a 2-year, 3-year project before we could kind of see maybe a more all-around player and we would get these highs and lows. And even this season, he's been a player where the Bills planted Dawson Knox on him. Not exactly known as one. You don't want a tight end on the top, edge rusher that you're facing anyway for the most part. Certainly not someone like Dawson Knox. And Dawson Knox handled him for like 6 straight up one-on-one reps when the Bills faced the Dolphins, which is just not good enough at this level, obviously. So to see him kind of come along earlier, be maybe a bit more diverse in what he can do and how he can win for you, I think is just a major boost for the Dolphins moving into the second half of the season.
Now, I do want to flip to the other side because I think that was it's a noteworthy story there as well, because when we talk about the Los Angeles Rams and what they could be this season, now sitting at 4-5, the season's not over yet by any means. They're still within winning this division as tight as the NFC West is, but that would have been a really good win for them to get, especially at home, to really help their cause to make the playoffs. So when I look at this team, and a big area where they struggled last night, it was along the offensive line. And the talk going into this week in Monday Night Football was the cavalry was coming back, right? I mean, Steve Avila was back for the first time since week 1. Joe Noteboom was back for the first time since week 1. Jonah Jackson was back for the first time since week 2, I believe. So there'd been a lot of time missed between these guys now back into the lineup. And the expectations were, okay, like I said, the cavalry is coming. We are getting better. We survived to this point in the season. Now we're getting a lot of our scheduled starters back out there. And it looked like they kind of needed a game altogether to really get back together, if you will. So was that something that you noticed where you go, we might have been, overblowing or just looking through rose-colored glasses what this Rams offensive line might be the second these guys got back? Or do you have a lot of faith in this group that next week and the week after is going to be much better and that the Rams offensive line is going to get back on track with these guys now healthy?
I don't know if I have a ton of faith just in the raw individual talent across the line. Jackson at center really, really struggled. Just bad snaps, really basic things, right, that you just can't have. And we've talked about this a ton throughout the season, like just the lack of continuity when you're facing this level of mugging, this level of like fake outs from the defense, right? Who's coming, who's not coming. You're going to get unblocked stuff if you just don't have the level of chemistry and continuity among the 5 guys. So that should improve as the season goes along, but it's not, they're running out of time here, right? Where they're probably gonna have to rip off 2-3 wins out of 4 games over the coming weeks. Like they just don't have the time now to have the weight on that continuity and chemistry aspect of it. To have 8 unblocked pressures against a team that is not blitzing is just nowhere near good enough at this level. And to not be able to finish drives because you're just getting shelled by your own offensive line is not good. And it just has a compound impact on the entire operation. I thought Stafford was pretty poor last night for the most part. Even when there was open things there, he was kind of hesitant or he was speeding things up. And that, to me, I just don't want to give a cop out to Stafford. The throws he has to hit, he's got some of the receivers back, right? They've been healthy at the receiver spots. And there are a couple of really big, cool, big-time throws. But this has been the story for Stafford, even when the line's been not healthy, that yes, there's way more pressure than there should be. Yes, there's more unblocked pressures than there should be, but that has an impact on even the plays where there isn't any pressure, where he's just missing throws they have to hit. And so you can still see that there's just a skittishness in the general operation of the offense because he doesn't have a ton of faith in what the offensive line can do. And if someone like Noteboom is playing it maybe not 100%, or maybe he's just still feeling himself back and there's some rust there. I thought with Steve Avila, who is a player I just absolutely love, I thought there was rust there in the run game, but he was probably the best of them in terms of pass pro. If you just have to take time to get that rust off, and Noteboom is going to really struggle at right tackle, the concertina effect along the rest of the group is just, you just cannot cover that up in 2 to 3 weeks. So I would always rather, even if the players are struggling, at least have the continuity and chemistry of who's out there to try and eliminate the unblocked stuff. Again, to have 8 unblocked pressures for a team who's not blitzing and they're bluffing constantly, I just don't know how you can have that at this stage in the season. I understand that they're working guys back in there, and that kind of stuff can happen. But to have snap issues, a ton of blown protections, that may correct itself quickly, but it's pretty unusual for that stuff to get worked out within 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, I offensive line, obviously this is a trenches version of the PFF NFL show, so we're going to be a little bit biased, but it's such a major part of getting your team to its ceiling. And I think when you look at Super Bowl winners of the past, a lot of them get lucky when it comes to the continuity and the lack of injuries and these guys playing a lot of snaps together. And even with the Rams getting a lot of their guys that maybe would have started the season as their scheduled starters back, well, they've missed a ton of time. And not only have they missed a ton of time like individually, but they've also missed a lot of time together. You kind of open that segment talking about like, okay, well, I don't totally believe in the individual talent of all of these guys. If you separate them one by one, it's not the most impressive offensive line. But as we have seen before, there are offensive lines that are like that. Look at the Washington Commanders, for example, right? I know Sam Cosby's fantastic, and they added Tyler Biadasz, and no disrespect to the rest of the guys in the offensive line, but we went into the season thinking, okay, like outside of Cosby, it's not like it's a group that defensive lines really fear individually, but all together, they're playing very, very well. And we thought that could have been the case with the Los Angeles Rams, but when you miss that much time, it's hard to lean on that. It's hard for that to be the case. So if the Rams are going to end up making the playoffs, that offensive line is going to have to really come together pretty quick, and they're going to have to hit the second half of the season pretty hot. We're going to stick along in the trenches. We're going to talk about the Buffalo Bills and the Detroit Lions in a second, but before we do that, I got to talk about this hat that I'm wearing here. Malin, it is fantastic. I've owned a lot of different hats throughout my life, and honestly, I buy a million different hats because I have them for different occasions. All right, well, this is a nice-looking hat. This is my workout hat. This is Malin, honestly, is an all-in-one hat. They're super durable, super structured. They've got all different kinds of sizes for all different sizes of heads. I have a tiny head. I'll admit that here on this show. And so sometimes actually finding a hat is difficult for me to do. This Malin hat it's perfect. I've got a couple of them already. Not because I think that I need them for different occasions, but honestly, I just have them all in different colors because I think they look fantastic. If you live an active lifestyle as well, if you're somebody that likes to work out with a hat, as I am as well, they're great for that specifically. They're very durable, as I mentioned. They're waterproof, so whether you're sweating, whether you're running in the rain, whatever it is, like these hats are going to be as durable as you need them to be. They are absolutely fantastic. You got to check them out. They've got all different types of sizes, styles, different colors, all that stuff. They've got a thermal collection, so it'll keep you a little bit warm during the winter. If you're watching this online, you could see that there. So these are the best hats that you're going to find. Go check them out. Go to Malin.com and check out their entire selection there. If you are looking for the world's most durable hat, look no further. I'm wearing it here on this show. I wear it on all different types of occasions. You can even wear it when you're going out. It's nice enough. I promise. When you guys get these things in the mail, you'll be like, all right, I can wear this hat out. I can wear this on a Friday or a Thursday night or a date night or something like that. They're great hats. I promise that you're going to love them. Go to Malin.com. That's MELIN.com and put these hats to the test yourself. Speaking of tests, we got a fun one this weekend. This could be another playoff rematch, an AFC Championship rematch. I mean, the Buffalo Bills, I was one of those people that before the season I went, man, I've picked Buffalo to reach the AFC Championship game or reach the Super Bowl each of the last 3 seasons. I have been a Buffalo Bills believer, and when I looked at the season this year, I went, man, I don't know. I've been burned by it a couple years in a row. I felt like too much was going to be on Josh Allen's plate, and Ollie, here they are. They're 8-2. They're one of the best football teams. They're one of the most balanced football teams, and I think that is the most ironic part is a lot of people myself included, looked at this Bills team going into the season and said, no, look at this roster. Too much is on Josh Allen's plate. And as a matter of fact, it feels about as balanced as the Bills' offense has been in a while, taking the ball out of Josh Allen's hands. Not that he's not the engine that makes it go, but I also think the offensive line and how they have been playing have been a big part of staying as balanced as they have wanted to in the run and the pass wherever the ball is for them on offense. They've got a particularly interesting test here against Steve Spagnuolo and the Kansas City Chiefs defense, which always plays you about as well as you possibly can. The Bills are doing some fun things things on offense with maybe those extra offensive linemen that we have seen so far this season. They're grading out well in those situations. But when you look at the Bills, just talk to me about where their offensive line is at and whether that's a reason to continue to believe in this team, or maybe if there's a little cause for concern going up against Kansas City, particularly in this matchup.
No, it's the thing beyond Allen playing unbelievable football that makes me believe that this could be legit this season. And that's why the Chiefs test is so fascinating to me. We've seen them do this before against the Chiefs, where they kind of bring a one-off game plan that's Chiefs specific during the regular season. They did it a couple of years back with Reggie Gilliam, where out of nowhere they had a fullback on the field like 70% of the time. They used the option run game with the quarterback a bunch more. Well, this year they've kind of been laying the tracks all season long. I think they run the most idiosyncratic offense in the entire NFL. It's probably them. Washington does things completely differently to everyone else because of Jaden Dines' skill set and the fact he's a rookie. But you hit on some of the extra line stuff. It's not just like a fun, gimmicky, every now and then thing for them with the extra offensive linemen. They are running 6 offensive linemen all the time. It's 18% of their base offense is using an extra offensive lineman, and they do it in such a fun way where they have Dion Dawkins, who's playing really well this season, split so far away from the rest of the formation where he's like on the moon. Then you've got a cluster of 5 guys almost acting as the true offensive line next to him, and you have Dawkins operating almost as like a tight end who would chip someone, right, to get the edge rusher to have a really wide arc if it's a play action shot. And they are just crushing people when they get to this extra set stuff. That there is no one else in the league running anywhere near that volume of extra line plays. The league average this season is 14 if you take the Bills out of it. And when you go through those, almost all of them, at least at the bottom end of the league, is kneel down stuff, it's goal line stuff. For the Bills, this is how they're getting to a lot of their explosive plays, both in the run game and then getting a bunch of deep play action shots out of the extra offensive line stuff too. So I'm fascinated to see if this is kind of something they've been working on, thinking ahead to January football, thinking ahead to playoff football, thinking ahead to having to face the Chiefs, and now we get a chance to go see it, how much they want to do it. There's been weeks this season where they brought that rate down slightly. They did this against the Colts. They only ran it about 6-7 times, but there's been other weeks where they've been in the 20s, where it's like, this is our go-to design for the week where we get big, we get an extra body on the field. They do it with 2 tight ends as well. So you got 6 linemen, 2 tight ends, and I understand that the tight ends are kind of like pseudo receivers as well, but it's a lot of mass support on the field, and it's not really how we've seen Josh Allen when he's been really at the apex of his powers, when he was rolling with Daboll and was first coming along, have that kind of success. Usually with Allen, it's get everyone spread out, give him as many options as possible. He can be the run game for us taking off. He can figure things out for us. And this year, they've kind of synthesized things and said, we are going to smash people with the run game. We're going to get really heavy, and then we'll take shots and make the shots easier for Josh than just having 4 or 5 eligibles out down the field for him at all times. And as you mentioned, the balance has worked tremendously well for them so far this season. And I just can't wait to see if this has been the plan all along to try and get after the Chiefs or not.
Yeah, over the last 4 weeks, this team has a 54.8% impact run block rate. So they're obviously getting after it as a run blocking unit, but also they've only given up 3 sacks over the last 4 weeks, and just a 21.6 pressure percentage total as a team. So they're just playing really well as a unit. We just mentioned, the offensive line with the Rams. Okay, that's a reason, so it's kind of a cause for concern with them. But with the Buffalo Bills, it feels like it's the exact opposite. And from the Chiefs side of things, I think it is very interesting because, I don't have these numbers right in front of me, but I was watching that game against the Broncos, and they're very comfortable putting all sorts of linemen on the defensive line, whether it's simulated pressures, whether it's mug looks, whatever, or even if it's just straight up, hey, we're playing 5 defensive linemen on the field at one time. The Kansas City Chiefs and Steve Spagnuolo are so flexible in what they do. They are prepared to attack you in ways that they feel like they have the advantage, or to really neutralize you the most. So it is fascinating that they're going up against a defensive coordinator with a defensive line that is as flexible and as customizable as the Chiefs are, because when the Buffalo Bills go with these jumbo personnels where you're getting multiple offensive linemen on the field, not just heavy with extra tight ends, jumbo personnel getting the extra linemen out there, do the Bills maybe have a trick up their sleeve where, hey, we've been playing this with 6 offensive linemen out here before, but we haven't really shown you what our best plays could be off of this yet, or some trickery, some pulls, some, guys being eligible, whatever it is. And I'm very excited for this matchup specifically. Do you think the Chiefs are a team that is willing to almost like match fire with fire, if you will, where you say like, okay, you're putting 6 on the offensive line. Guess what? We're going to match you immediately with the same thing. We're going to go beef for beef here, and we're not going to be afraid of this. We're not going to try to play it any different way. We're not going to try to, all right, well, we'll be a little bit faster on defense while you're a little bit stronger. It feels like the Chiefs are very willing to do that from what we've seen over the last couple of weeks. Specifically, I saw that even last week against Denver.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to second guess Spags. He's the smartest guy to ever do this. He'll probably have a plan I never dreamt of in my life, and it'll work effectively knowing what he will do. And it's just a really tough buy because, as you mentioned, if you just say, hey, let's go like mono, we'll put 5 big guys, we'll reduce off from, they still have, because of the way they use the tight ends, who, as I said, are kind of like pseudo receivers, it then gets you we're in a one-on-one situation with our linebackers on their tight ends. How do we feel about that assignment? And if you don't feel good about it, you just have to naturally make yourself smaller up front, and then they can just pound away with the run game. But you hit on something really interesting about, do they have a trick up their sleeve? What's interesting about what they've done with the 6th lineman this season is usually when you put an extra hat on the field, you're trying to buy a gap as an offense, right? If you get an extra player on there, you basically add an extra gap into the offensive front that you feel really good about in the run game, right? It's not a tight end, it's not a receiver coming down, it's a true lineman, so you feel good about having an extra gap. And you do that so you can run gap scheme runs so that you can seal and pull and move people around, that you can have an extra gap in the quarterback run game as well. And the Bills have done basically none of that when they put an extra lineman on. It is pure get the big guys on the field and we just smash people. That's what we do. We let the backs read it out and then we take play action shots. They haven't really done any of the classic things you would do for why you would put an extra lineman on the field. So I do wonder, have they been holding some of that stuff in reserve? Is there some cool RPO plays at midfield? Is there going to be some kind of cool creative trickery to try and steal 7 points once they get to the plus side of the field? That is what I would be on, like, red alert, 5-alarm fire everywhere for the Chiefs this week, is what do they have saved up that is specifically designed for us? They have not done this stuff all season, and the Bills have really, when they use Josh Allen as a downhill power threat, has been against the Chiefs. That's one thing they go to. Like, it's worth the investment of the downside of doing that because this is the best team in the NFL. So I think we'll see more variety from them in the run game when they get with those big bodies on the field. And I don't know exactly where Spags will figure, okay, how do I match this? If we just go big on big, we can probably solve the problem of just them driving us off the ball. But if they're adding extra gaps in, if they've got more of an option element, if they've got the RPO element, then we may be in some trouble. And if we put the big bodies on, then it's Kincaid, it's Knox, it's one-on-one coverage with our linebackers. Do we feel great about that assignment? And then how do you kind of solve that solution? So I think it's kind of the go-to thing in the game. We know the Chiefs have stuttered on offense for much of the season. If the Bills can just relentlessly drive the ball from those big sets and kind of dictate time of possession, dictate the flow of the game, it's going to make things really tricky on the other side for the Chiefs. So I think it's kind of the major go-to factor. Can the Chiefs find a solution to this or not?
I think the linebacker point that you brought up is a really good one, because I'm just looking at now some coverage grades, and coverage is tough for a linebacker anyways, right? It's a lot of tough assignments. I mean, sometimes guys can catch passes and it's in your zone and you could have been there, but coverage is tough as a linebacker. It really is. So you understand why the coverage grades are a little bit lower. It's what makes guys like Fred Warner absolute aliens when they have things like elite coverage grades as a linebacker. But when I'm looking at the Kansas City Chiefs specifically, I want to look at their 3 linebackers, because one of them goes into a little bit of the point that we were talking about. Nick Bolton, 57.6 coverage grade. Drew Tranquil, 45.3 coverage grade this season. And then Leo Chanel has an 82.2 coverage grade, so his coverage grade's a little bit better. He's given up less catches. He's had less coverage reps, but he's given up less catches. He's got a forced incompletion as well. But the interesting part of this is that Leo Chanel, when we talked about, okay, well, if the Bills are going to put an extra offensive lineman on the field, how do you sort of cope with that? Leo Chanel is the way that you cope with that, right? I mean, he's an absolute animal. So he is a linebacker that plays with the strength of a defensive lineman sometimes, where he's absolutely ferocious when he's attacking the line of scrimmage. So when you talk about on the fly needing somebody to match strength for strength when the Bills go a little bit heavier, even when it's just tight ends in the game, you've got to be comfortable and you've got to think that Spags is going to use Chanel more on the line of scrimmage as that versatile player than he would be in coverage. So that leaves those 2 other linebackers. I think you're okay with them being coverage players, but to me, if you're not totally comfortable with that, I wonder if this is a big versatile multi-safety set game. Like, I wonder if this is a big 3 safety set type of a game for the Kansas City Chiefs. And if that's how they are more comfortable covering the tight ends that might be there in heavy personnel, and even if it's not a jumbo package where we're getting an extra offensive lineman out there, maybe the Bills are just playing 2 tight ends and they're getting both of those guys in Kincaid and Knox out there. Is this a game where Spagnuolo is comfortable playing more safeties or wants to play more safeties, whether you would call one of them necessarily like a slot defender like Jamari Connor obviously is in there, but I think about some of the other safeties they have, like the Jaden Hicks being a rookie and getting him on the field a little bit more if you feel like his size and athleticism, you're more comfortable with that matching up against the tight end. So I think about that because when I think about those linebackers in particular, Chanel is the one that might be grading a little bit better in coverage, but he's the one I think you got to keep close to the line of scrimmage because of how impactful he could be there, even going up against offensive linemen. So do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think this might be a multi-safety set type of a game for the Chiefs, maybe more than we have seen them in previous weeks?
Yeah, I think you nailed it because even with having solid coverage grades or whatnot, the coverage assignment of, okay, we're facing an 8-man box who wants to drive us off the ball. That's all they do. They run duo every time, basically. They're just going to slam into us. The back reads it. The backs are really good at reading this stuff. And if Josh pulls it, he's ripping it. Okay, that's kind of the assignment for this. And they do it 18% of the time. So it's going to happen against us at maybe 25% because that's how they want to attack us. The initial step being drive down because we got to play the run, then bail out is a different coverage assignment, as you said, than kind of I'm rolling to the flat and I can read things and I can pick things up on the fly. The way to get after that, as you mentioned, would be, okay, let's just split our defense in 2. We got the front and we got the secondary and we just play top down. And so the safety, as you mentioned, can kind of fill in late into the run fit if need be. And if we give up 6 yards on that, we're good with it. They can't stay in big sets forever. And at some point, if they pull and try to hit us with a play action shot, at least we have a third safety on the field who's playing down rather than having a linebacker kind of starting up front and then kind of turning to try and find and pick up those crossing routes, which is where they've kind of nuked people doing that. The only downside would be if you go and watch the Seahawks film, that is a really, really rough one. Mike McDonald tried some of this stuff and it was a disaster, right? They just got mauled off the ball. Now the Chiefs made us say, we got better players, we got a better plan, we think we can handle this. But even like the correct way of going about this, they've just played so well, the Bills. The line has been so good at doing this stuff. The play calling's been really well in sync with when to go to the play action shots versus when to just keep driving away with the run game, that it's really difficult to pick up. I think it's as basic as, can our studs just kind of outbeat the scheme? Can Chris Jones just wreck plays one-on-one? Can as you mentioned, can Leo Chenal just wreck a couple of plays one-on-one to force them to get out of this stuff early in the game, make them a drop-back offense? If they're a drop-back offense, we think we got a pretty good chance of kind of disrupting this stuff when they're just kind of in straight drop-back pass protection mode. But it's a really, really difficult assignment. I think the 3 safety set you mentioned is probably the best approach to this, is to get really heavy up front, put 3 safeties on the field, kind of try and buy into both worlds defensively. But they're also, because they've got the 2 tight ends who are really good receivers, it allows them to say, well, we can move out of this. 90% of the time the Bills are in these sets, they are motioning and shifting in some way. So presenting one thing pre-snap and then either bringing the tight ends in or splitting them out. So even if you feel comfortable, like, well, if it's just a big bodied set, we can have the big front, we can have the speed on the back end that we need to play top down. They can move and get out of this stuff, and they give Allen the freedom to kind of pick his spots and do what he wants to do at the line of scrimmage. So it is truly, I think, one of the most underrated aspects of the season, the way the Bills have evolved their offense and what they're doing specifically with those stuff. This is like the ultimate, let's see it then. Let's see it against a really good defensive mind, a really good defensive team you're going to have to go through to try and win the whole damn thing. It's just the most exciting schematic matchup I can think of this season. I
know. It's not a primetime matchup. I kind of wish it would be, so the world would get to watch this one as it unfolds live. But it's Bills Chiefs. It's going to be a fantastic schematic matchup against some really good coaching staffs and some really good players. So I'm very excited to get to that. Let's our final talking point for today. I want to examine the Detroit Lions. Lions are obviously playing well. They're one of the best teams in the NFL, even without Aiden Hutchinson. But I do want to dig into that a little bit, because this Lions team isn't just trying to win the division. They're not just trying to squeak into the playoffs. They're trying to win the whole thing, right? And I think that they have the DNA to win the whole thing. We saw that this past weekend with a massive comeback win and a buzzer-beater field goal to win against the Houston Texans on Sunday Night Football. Their pass rush specifically is something that we have talked about over the last couple of weeks. But now that they have added Za'Darius Smith, now that we have a couple of weeks to really, well, more than a couple of weeks, to really dig into how they have dealt without having Aiden Hutchinson. I mean, when you look at this team, through the first 6 weeks of the season, those are the first 6 weeks that Aiden Hutchinson was playing. Were the offensive lines the best that they were going up against? No, but still, far and away, the number 2 overall graded defensive line in the NFL and the number 1 graded pass rush defensive line in the NFL. Since that time, so week 7 to right now, they are 28th in the NFL in terms of their defensive line's pass rush grade. That's edge rushers and interior defensive linemen combined. So, Ollie, it was always going to be a little bit of a shock. Like, okay, week 7, it's not like they were going to have an immediate game plan for, okay, Hutchinson's down. Like, this is the game plan that we're going to. It was always going to take a little bit of time. But we've had a little bit of time now here for them to adjust. So, what have you thought about the Detroit Lions, how they have coped with the loss of Aiden Hutchinson, and then, of course, the addition to Za'Darius Smith? Like, how does that go into what they have been doing since week 6 when Aiden Hutchinson went down?
Yeah, bringing Smith in obviously is the huge game changer there, and can we get enough from him in just kind of a general 4 down and go pass rush, the way you've got to go and try and win championships with this thing. When you look at them through the first few weeks, as you mentioned, with Hutchinson on the field, a 4-man pass rush without a blitz, they had a 72.8% pass rush win rate. 72.8%. No one in the NFL was above 50. That's how dominant they were. And as you mentioned, yeah, some terrible offensive lines. Hutchinson out of his mind, right? He's making up the bulk of that stuff. He's winning basically every single rep, so he juices your figures. But now they're down to 50%, which is 10th in the NFL. Can they get that to, I don't know, 55, 56, somewhere there? I think 50% is right along. We can win a championship doing that. But you just have to have the takeaways that they've had over the past few weeks stay at the kind of level they have, which is like two basically every week, 3 some weeks, to try and think you can get through the playoffs. I think getting 2-3 takeaways every game, I just don't think is sustainable. I think you've got to just get more pressure, more drive ending plays, and an awful lot of when you go through some of their pressure figures, the unblocked pressures that have jumped up since Hutchinson's actually gone out of the lineup, it's a lot to do with the coverage and just how well they're holding up on the back end, particularly with what they do with their safety. So they just don't quite have the same level of torque, obviously, without Hutchinson there. And they've not really found, I would say, like a great kind of schematic solution to how to overcome the fact you lose a great player. Obviously, he's winning one-on-one all the time, makes everyone look really good, makes everyone's life easier. Without him, they haven't really changed any of what I would say like their pass rush profile. The sim pressure rate's pretty much the same. The blitz rate is hovering right around the same as it was before Hutchinson went out. They've changed up what they're doing in the blitz world slightly. They've had to kind of take away pressures that were designed to go off Hutchinson. He's so dominant, we'll send another guy behind him, right? They got to allocate so many resources to him. We know he's going to win, so we can tag an extra guy behind him in some way. That guy should be screaming open for the most part. Now they've had to just make it more of a linebacker straight down the chute type system, which has been somewhat effective, but is also pretty predictable on a week-to-week basis, and they're pretty tendency-based in when they send pressure to. So I just don't think they've really found a solution yet, which is understandable. They lost the best pass rusher in the NFL. It's going to be really difficult to replace that guy. You got to try and do it by finding new quirky solutions in the pressure world. You got to hope that Za'Darius Smith hits from the get-go and can at least raise the floor of the pass rush, if not kind of take the ceiling anywhere near where Hutchinson was before. So I do think that kind of under the radar in some of the makeup of what they're doing, it's slightly concerning in terms of can we get through 3-4 playoff rounds if we need to with the pass rush as it is right now.
And I wonder if they are going to just try to, not that Za'Darius Smith is Aiden Hutchinson, but like you said, I wonder if they're going to sort of try to revive their defensive line strategy by at least just putting Za'Darius Smith in that Hutchinson role and hoping that you play it a little bit better. Because, I'm looking at the numbers again. This is week 7 on. Josh Paschal, Al-Quadri Muhammad, James Houston. Like, these are the guys that are getting most of the pass rush reps. And, Muhammad has a 12.1% pass rush win percentage. James Houston has a 12.5% pass rush win percentage. Josh Paschal is all the way down to 5.6. So it's obviously not the high impact players. And Muhammad has the highest pass rush grade of the group, but it's still just a 62.7. So, we said that it was going to take a totally different shifting to make up for the loss of Aiden Hutchinson. And it seems like what you said, they're blitzing a little bit more. They're blitzing in different ways, but you can't just have your whole strategy be based around blitzing. It's going to burn you, especially when you get into the playoffs, and I think that's the reason why you make this trade. The Detroit Lions are not necessarily worried about not making the playoffs. They're worried about, okay, when we get against the best teams in the NFL, when we have to win 3 games against the 3 toughest opponents that we have faced so far this season in a row to get to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl, that's where you need to make sure that you have some more in your arsenal. And I love the addition of Za'Darius Smith, not because I think that he is going to be Aiden Hutchinson, but again, because of exactly what you said. You can at least plug Smith into that role that we saw from Hutchinson, where we talked about this in the early parts of the season, how Detroit was aligned along their defensive line. It was Hutchinson a little bit wider outside the shoulder of the offensive tackle. It was a defensive tackle right on the inside shoulder of the guard, so the guard could not help out the tackle. It automatically put Hutchinson in on an island. The offensive line was normally going to have to shift their protection away from Hutchinson, so the best hope that you had was that you had a running back in the backfield that could maybe chip Hutchinson, but Hutchinson's such a monster that the hands are moving so fast, the counters are so good, and they're second nature for him. He'd even beat some of those blocks as well as the tackle in front of him. So to even have a player who gives you the capability of having that threat in that role with Za'Darius Smith, to me, is the thing that is worth monitoring moving forward, because they had a ton of success, not just with Hutchinson individually, but within that defensive line structure and that defensive line plan of putting a guy one-on-one, right? It's like the ISO basketball, where it's like, all right, everybody clear out of the paint. They're playing one-on-one. I got the ball up top. Let me beat the guy to the basket. Like, that's essentially what the Lions were trying to do with Hutchinson. And I don't feel they even have a player that has the ability to win one-on-one, that has the ability to cross a guy over and get to the basket clean and get a layup. Now with Za'Darius Smith, they sort of might have that at least in flashes. And I think that's, to me, what I'm going to be looking forward to watching with him now on this team in that role. Do they revive that role for him specifically for what that defensive line wants to do?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the only negative of that being the plan, right? Rather than Smith's a guy you can move around the formation, you can do cool things with, put him in different spots, line him up inside, kick him out on either edge. The brilliance of Hutchinson just being such a dominant player is, as you mentioned, not only did you were able to scheme those one-on-ones, they bring extra guys in to help and chip out. By having those guys come in and help and chip out, you're washing out ineligible somewhere. There's a tight end staying in, there's a back staying in, there's a receiver having to block down, and you're just buying yourself and gaining yourself an extra player in coverage, which if you become more of a blitz-heavy team, obviously you're doing the inverse, and you're relying more on the blitz getting home and things like that. I don't know if Smith is the type of player, even going back to last season when he had a really, really good season, that it's going to force the team to necessarily keep people in to monitor him and to allocate those resources to him. So you're still not quite getting the juice and the help on the coverage side from having the dominant pass rusher as you would do with Hutchinson. I would really like to see Glenn find a way to dust off really wonky, creative pressure stuff. That what they're doing in the blitz game is just not really kind of at the elite of the elite level. You know, you watch their offense and it's just so many cool, fresh, creative things every week. And they were so fortunate to have the best pass rusher in the NFL. That's just what Hutchinson was. And you're able to build a fairly simplistic structure to maximize everyone on the team. Now that he's gone out, the kind of answer to losing Hutchinson being we send linebackers more straight down the middle of the line of scrimmage, to me, it's just not really a great solution to what the problem was. If you're going to up the heat slightly, you're better off, I think, bringing it from really unusual, wonky places, right? Of putting weird players that you don't expect to be on the field, sending them after the quarterback, roll Brian Branch down more, use him more. And I know that they want to be sound in coverage and they've been so strong in coverage, they don't really want to mess with that. But I do think to get through the playoffs, they're either going to have to find a way to simulate pressure more or find more creative ways to kind of send for, but them to be unusual rushes than the offense is expecting. And maybe some of that will be game plan based and maybe they'll roll that out by the playoffs, but that just hasn't been shown on tape so far. And I think just expecting, well, Smith will come in, our four-man rush will be better, when what they've done, as they did with Hutchinson, and said, well, our interior is really strong, so we'll blitz behind the interior. We used to blitz behind Hutchinson, now we'll blitz behind the interior, and we'll pop three things that way. When you go through the unblocked pressures, a lot of it is just kind of, a busted, naked keeper right from the quarterback. That's good. That's an unblocked pressure. It's not really like crafting something the way we were talking about with the Dolphins last night, where people think you're sending heat, actually everyone's dropping out and then someone free through the line of scrimmage. It's like a play design win for the DC. They don't have many play design pressures from the staff. So I think they can do a lot more in that world, and Smith can help you, right? Because you can move him around all over the place. And if he is the number one go-to guy and he's head up over the center, that shifts things slightly than just saying, well, we're going to split our front like we used to with Aiden, and Smith is over there and the other three guys are over here. I just think there's more they could do, I think, in terms of the front to help them out.
And that is more towards Za'Darius Smith's style, right? And that's what's so fascinating of how they're actually going to use him. Are they going to try to put him in that Aiden role and try to get a little bit, get back to, I guess I should say, more of that 4 down lineman type of a team to try to win with 4 guys out there? But Za'Darius Smith's style, I would say, like in Cleveland with Green Bay, you know, like with the Ravens as well, like he's been that stand-up guy. He's been that guy who's just been able to roam the line of scrimmage from a stand-up 2-point stance, and you never know like really where he is rushing from. So I think that is a great point as well. Are the Lions going to lean more into what we have seen from Za'Darius Smith, or are they going to try to lean more into what they had success with in the early parts of the season? That is going to be a fascinating development. Everybody go follow all of Ollie's great work over at the Read Optional Substack, the newsletter, the podcast. He does the Audibles and Analytics podcast with John Ledyard as well. Make sure you guys are going over there and subscribing to all of that great stuff. Also, go to PFF.com. Get yourself a PFF Plus subscription. You can see a lot of the grades and the stats that here we talked about on this and every single show. You can do that by going to subscribe.pff.com. For Ollie Connolly, I'm Trevor Sikkema saying thank you so much for watching a Week 10 edition of In the Trenches. We'll see you same time next week. See you guys then.